All right. I only have a few minutes, so I'm just gonna kind of give you an overview of what I was gonna talk about tonight. The two questions that I started off with when I wrote this was, what do you do when you're uncertain? And then, where do you go when you can't see the next step? When you feel like you're stuck and have no idea what to do next. Okay, so I started out with those questions because usually that's how I write these out. I ask myself a question because it's something that I've been thinking about, right? So I talked about this a little bit, but I want to talk about what it's like when you've divided your faith between God and the world. I feel like every time I get up here, I talk about like hard times and feeling burnt out and unsure about things, but that's probably because I feel like that a lot of the time, and I think that's a part of being alive, is that we feel like that a lot of the time. I think, at least for most people. But I also think it's really important, and especially for you teenagers, to understand this concept of being divided. Especially now when the world is so accessible to you, it's easier than ever to have one foot in and one foot out, right? It's in your face all the time. So sometimes though, let's take a little spin around, sometimes life goes great, right? Sometimes life is going great. You have your plan laid out, it's going perfectly, you know where you're going next, you can see what comes next, and you know everything's gonna be okay, you just know it. And during those times, as I've noticed in myself, we kind of start to turn away a little bit from our faith, right? Not always in a huge way. It doesn't mean every single time something good happens to you, you quit church. That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm saying, like, we get in our heads, why do I need to rely on faith when everything's going so great? Right? Why do I need to talk to God? Everything's going great in my life. Are you kidding me? I'm doing this all on my own. I'm the greatest. Just me? Okay. It's times like that make us start to think, like, oh, I've got this, right? I'm so good and stable. My goodness, I'm the greatest. I got my life all figured out. I'm so perfect. And we start to lose focus, which you talked about a few times before. We start to look in other places for our happiness, and we give other things credit for our happiness. Things other than God. Then often, as things do, something happens. Throws us off balance. Throws us off of our plans. Suddenly we're thrown into the unknown again, and we need guidance, direction, we need faith again. We come back to God, this is the cycle, we come back to God and we focus back, and we find our comfort and our strength, and our relationship is renewed and our focus is shifted back. But what happens when things are good again? Do we go back and do the same thing over and over again? It seems like, yeah, a lot of times. I'm talking about myself. A lot of times it seems like this is the cycle that we keep going down. But then, what happens when we run into troubles again? Do we fall back into the same pattern of following God only when we need Him, but turn to something else when we feel like we can do it on our own? I'm going to read James 1, verse 2 through 8. It says, "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow, for when your endurance is fully developed, you'll be perfect and complete, needing nothing. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and He will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. But when you ask Him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Do not waver, for a person with divided loyalty is as unsettled as a wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. Such people should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Their loyalty is divided between God and the world, and they are unstable in everything they do." Okay. The Bible tells us that being unstable, like the pattern that I'm talking about, means your faith is not in God alone. Which, if you think about it, makes sense. If your faith is in God alone, then you'd only look to God, right? And we're talking about the pattern of when things are good, you kind of look to yourself, or you look to the world around you, even sometimes when things are bad. But because the Bible also tells us that those people who are divided between God and the world should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Now, hurts a little bit, right? Especially when you start to look at this pattern and start to look inside yourself and think, am I divided? Because this says those who are divided should not expect to receive anything. How many times have we wanted something or prayed for something or maybe even felt like you deserved something and you didn't get it? What did you do then? Did you start to shift your focus from God and his plan to yourself and your plan? This is what I do. Do you take matters into your own hands? Try to make things happen? How'd that work out for you? Right? I'm talking to myself. Most of the time, when we take matters into our own hands, it's not pretty. We kind of dig ourselves a little hole, right? And then we're like, God, help me get out. Even though we dug the hole. But I can also tell you that not only does nothing usually come from it, but taking things into your own hands most often makes matters worse. And I'm not trying to say that every time your prayer is unanswered, it's because your focus is divided. But I think we often want instant gratification when we ask for something, and when we don't get it, we start to look other places.
That's good.
Right? We try to do things ourselves the way we think it should go, and most of the time that just ends poorly. But when our faith is divided, we are divided. When we are divided, we're unstable. When we're unstable, it is much easier to fall. It's discouraging to me, and I've seen this a lot. I've been in church my entire life. I've seen this a lot. It's discouraging to me when I see people who 1 week are so excited, they want a job in the church, they want to do this and that, and they're excited and they're moving forward, and then a couple weeks later, it's like, where are they? Oh, they quit the church? Okay. I can't tell you how many times that's happened.
Right.
You know, it happens all the time. And it's discouraging. It's discouraging because it's like, what can we do? We have this conversation sometimes, like, with the leadership. What can we do to keep our workers, right? We need more workers, but we're afraid because sometimes workers, they quit once they get a job, right? That happens all the time. What do we do to keep our workers? But it's not really anything that we can do, right? It's within yourself. So it makes me wonder if those people who so easily fall are divided. Makes me wonder if when I so easily fall or am so easily discouraged, if I'm divided. It makes me wonder if they or if I'm standing on unstable ground, torn between God and the world. Torn between letting God have control and trying to control everything myself. So I've talked about focus a lot these past few weeks, and I think it's because, honestly, the point of all of this is if we fix our focus, we fix 99% of our problems, of our struggle. When we finally decide to let God have everything, and we jump fully into what he has for us, instead of keeping 1 foot on land and 1 foot on his plan, then we'll see real change. When we shift our focus, everything else is going to shift. And honestly, I also think that if we as leaders shift our focus, then why wouldn't those who follow us also shift their focus? I don't know this for a fact, but I feel like it's a chain reaction thing. If you're sold out to God and God's plan, why wouldn't the people that follow you or the people that you're leading also be sold out? If you're excited about what God's doing in our church, if you're excited about your job, if you're excited about being a leader, why wouldn't someone else want to be the same way? I think when we decide that we want to be all in, that we want to jump all in, then we'll see real change, not only in ourselves, but in everyone around us. We have to stop living divided. And it's not an easy thing to do. Because, guess what? I mean, we live in the world, guys. Personally, I want to be liked. I don't want to say controversial things and lose friends. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be the weird person. You know, I don't want to. I want to be liked by people. But it's those fears that keep us from going on. And the crazy thing is, I think every single person has those fears, and we just never talk about it. But we have to choose a side. We have to choose a side. I would encourage you to choose Jesus. I hope you will. But you're going to choose a side one way or another. And if it's not Jesus, what's the other alternative? You know? But we have to choose one. And I think it starts from us up here, from us who are teaching classes, from us who, you know, everything that goes on in this church, the leaders. I think it starts with us. And I think it's going to go down. But if you're not a leader, that doesn't mean that it doesn't start with you too. What happens when the people who aren't leaders, but they come to church every service, what happens when they jump into it? What happens when they get excited about what's happening? More people are going to come, right? More people are going to come. More people are going to stay. More people are going to want to step into leadership and step into serving and everything else that goes on in this church. More people are going to want to do that because if you're excited, it's contagious. It's contagious. And so that's all I want to talk about. I'm glad that it went the way it did, because I think for teenagers especially, because, I mean, I was just a teenager, 4 years ago? But it's hard. It's hard when you want to be liked, and it's hard when you want to fit in. And that's a lot of pressure, especially as a teenager. But it doesn't really go away. It gets a little easier, but it doesn't really go away. But as a teenager, it's hard. It's hard to not want to have one foot in the world, right? So I want to encourage you guys to take that plunge, because you're not going to be disappointed. You're not going to be let down. If you shift your focus and you keep your focus on God, and you follow the path that He has set for you, and you don't try to take it into your own hands, and you don't try to take credit for it, give up everything. Because you're going to gain so much. And that's for everybody in here. All right, well, it's 7:30, so thank you.